Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to record this topic this afternoon, and we trust that it will be a successful recording. The King of the North of Daniel 11. Is it important to study this subject? Is it important to know the book of Daniel? Jesus said in Matthew 24:15, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso reads, let him understand. Jesus wants us to understand the book of Daniel as much as possible. That quotation is taken from Daniel 9, which is connected with the vision of chapters 10 to 12. And the spirit of prophecy, remember, has made the declaration that when we as a people understand what this book means to us, there will be seen among us a great revival. That's from Testimonies to Ministers 113, a great revival. Do we need a revival? We surely do. I believe that a true understanding of Daniel and Revelation will help to revive us, give us spiritual revival. Now, when we come to the last vision of Daniel, chapters 10 to 12, we find that this was given an answer to a question of the angel to Christ, as brought to view in Daniel 8. And so I want to read the question here, for two questions were asked by the angel. And the first question was answered in chapter 8 and 9. Notice what it is. In verse 13, I heard one saint or holy one speaking, and another saint, holy one or angel, said to that certain saint which spake, how long or unto when shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? Now notice that there are two things. How long will the sanctuary be trodden underfoot? And how long will the host, God's people, be trodden underfoot? The answer to the sanctuary being trodden underfoot is in Daniel 8 and 9. Under 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And that's when the knowledge of the sanctuary and no longer being trodden down was brought to view. The second question, how long will the host of God's people be trodden down, is answered in chapters 10 to 12 in the last vision, and particularly chapters 11 and on into verse 1 of chapter 12. And there it tells us when God's people will be delivered from the King of the North. All right, so this is what we're seeking then. And in Daniel 12, remember, or Daniel 11:45, it says, at that time shall the King of the North come to his end, and none shall help him. And what's the next statement? And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince that stands for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble. Brethren, this prediction starts off with Cyrus, who delivered literal Israel from the captivity of literal Babylon. And if you look at chapter 10, the first verse, this is what it says. Cyrus, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed to Daniel. And that's how it commences, with Cyrus, who was a marvelous type of Christ. He delivered Israel, literal Israel, from literal Babylon. The prediction ends with Michael, Christ, the greater than Cyrus, who will deliver spiritual Israel from spiritual Babylon. You see that? And that's the theme of this great prediction. And if we miss that, we miss the true understanding of it. So there it is. It ends with Michael, and he delivers his people at that time. So let's come now to the chapter 10, and it says here concerning this thing that was revealed to Daniel, it says the thing was true But the time appointed was long, I guess much longer than Daniel dreamed. This is something that is truth, you see. And when we come now to chapter 11, verse 1, notice what it says, or verse 2. And now, and here is Gabriel speaking, and now I will show thee the truth. Brethren, what's in this chapter is the truth. Is truth important? It is. So we should try and understand it. And of course, the book of Daniel, these verses we're going to deal with mostly, deal with the last days. And so, brethren, maybe the time has come for us to understand some of these hazy sections of Daniel. Maybe we should be explaining them or studying them more intently, because probably there's a message, there is truth for us in these last days. All right, so we go on now. I will show thee the truth. And in this chapter there's a lot of detail, a tremendous lot of detail. Of course, we can't deal with it all today. Some of it's hazy, and through the years it's been vaguely understood, a lot of it. But throughout the chapter there are great landmark events brought to view which are there's no chance of missing what they mean. And these landmark events are guides to us in interpreting the chapter. And I'll notice with you the landmarks as we go through. They serve as a guide in understanding the general meaning of the chapter. All right, now let's notice an outline of the chapter. When we do the video proper, we'll have this outline in print. The first part deals with the Persian power, the rise of Persia. Remember, Cyrus was king of Persia. 538 was the reign when Persia conquered the then known world. Then the second part deals with Greece under Alexander the Great and his successors. The third section deals with the rise of Rome under the Caesars. The fourth part deals with the rise of spiritual Rome. And who is spiritual Rome? The papacy, under the popes. The fifth part deals with the church in the wilderness. The sixth, Rome, the papal Rome supremacy of 1260 years, which we all know about. The seventh part is Rome, papal Rome under attack, when the deadly wound is given. Number 8 is the papacy's revival and final onslaught. And the final section is the papacy's end and the deliverance of God's people. Now there we have the 9 divisions of this chapter. And this corresponds with the rest of the book of Daniel. And this is very important. Daniel 2 starts off with Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the second advent. Daniel 7 parallels it. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then it adds to it the principle of repetition and enlargement. It adds to it, it brings in the little horn, which is a part of the fourth beast, and also the judgment and the second advent. Daniel 8 and 9, again, miss out Babylon, because Babylon by this time's gone, and so it starts with Medo-Persia, Greece, the little horn, which is pagan and papal Rome, and the judgment, the second advent. And now we come to 10 to 12, and it starts off with Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, papal Rome, but a lot more detail concerning papal Rome. Each repetition enlarges, particularly on the papacy. Papal Rome. And and concludes with the second advent of Christ. Because the time of trouble, remember, when Michael stands up, ends at the second advent. All right, now let's notice the origin and location of the king of the north. Let's have a look at this. Who is the king of the north, or where does it originate? Well, brethren, according to the verses here, after Alexander ruled the world, it says his kingdom was divided up into 4, and then into 2, the north and the south. The north part was led by the Seleucids, Seleucus and Ptolemy and other named kings. The king of the south was Egypt under the Ptolemies. There you have the south, and there you have the north. You see that? And the territory of the king of the north, of the Seleucids, was Babylon and then Syria, not Turkey as such. And the Bible tells us that the north part, the north, is by the Euphrates. And here's the Euphrates coming right down to the Persian Gulf. By the Euphrates. This is very important. It's Babylon's territory. Let me give you some texts on this. Jeremiah 46:6. And remember, Jeremiah was the book that Daniel we're told, was studying when he was writing his book. He was studying the book of Jeremiah. And so Jeremiah is closely linked to Daniel. And notice what Jeremiah says is the north. The north by the river Euphrates, 46 verse 6. Again, the north country by the river Euphrates, chapter 46 verse 10. Again, I will send and take all the families of the north and Nebuchadnezzar, and will bring them against this land, Jeremiah 25:9. See, the families of the north and Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, were pictures coming from the north. And why from the north? Why from the north? Because when they came across into the land of Israel, they always had to go up because of the desert. They had to go up and come down from the north. You see? So the Babylonians and other enemies of Israel coming from that direction always came from the north. The north, that was the place of the enemies of God, the place of Babylon, you see. And so this is a very important principle. And when Seleucus, the first king of the north, of that section, set up his capital, his first capital, it was by old Babylon on the Euphrates, right over here. Not up here near Turkey. You can still see the ruins of Seleucia today across the sand from old Babylon. And then he began to extend his empire. He moved across and overran Syria, and then over toward a part of Asia Minor. And so that finally became the territory of the king of the north. And he moved his capital finally over here into Syria. So then there's the territory of the king of the north, Babylon and Syria. And that's very important in this connection. Now we find that after these two kings, these two powers, had fought amongst themselves, and quite a section of Daniel 11 deals with their struggles, the struggles between the king of the north and the king of the south. Why is this mentioned? Because it affected the people of God, the Jews, who were between them. That's why. And the Jews, of course, had a torrid time in those conflicts. Well, finally, what happened was this: pagan Rome rose to power, and she overcame the Greeks, and she occupied the territory of the king of the north. And in that sense, pagan Rome became the king of the north. Pagan Rome. And pagan Rome is introduced into this chapter in verse 14. I'm not reading much scripture, am I? No, I haven't got the time to do that now. But I want you to notice verse 14 is the introduction to pagan Rome. And it says, in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. That's Egypt. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. Now there's the introduction to Rome. How do we know? The robbers of thy people. The Hebrew is the breakers of thy people. And who are the breakers of thy people? Daniel 7, when it describes the fourth kingdom of pagan Rome, the lion, 3 times it speaks of her as being the breaker of all who resisted her, and particularly of God's people. The breaker. Notice Daniel 7:7. It devoured and brake in pieces Again, verse 19, which devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with its feet. Verse 23, the fourth kingdom shall be diverse from all kingdoms and shall devour the whole earth and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. The breaker, friends, is pagan Rome. And this power is also brought to view again in Daniel 12. And this is how we identify it again as Rome, the breaker of God's people. And here Rome is introduced as the king of the north. For it then says, so the king of the north shall come, next verse, and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand. Egypt didn't withstand Rome, for Rome finally overwhelmed Egypt. And then notice the next bit. Neither his chosen people. Who are his chosen people? Israel. That's right. Neither the Jews. Rome conquered the Jews. Neither shall there be any strength to withstand. And verse 16 repeats it. But he that comes against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land. What's the glorious land? The glorious land was Palestine. And brethren, Rome stood in Palestine. And notice what it says, which by his hand shall be consumed. And do you know that for centuries Palestine was called the land of ruins because of the ruin wrought by the Romans in the destruction of Jerusalem. For not only was Jerusalem was destroyed, but the whole land of Israel was devastated. That's when the cities of Bethsaida, Capernaum, and others that Jesus predicted, remember, that they would come to their end because of their rejection of him. That's when they all met their end. Tremendous destruction by Rome, pagan Rome, against the glorious land. And so then it goes on to describe some details about pagan Rome, and it mentions three of its leaders. And here we have another key to tell us, indicate to us we're right in our interpretation. For three emperors are brought to view here: Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, and Tiberius Caesar. And notice how it describes them. It says, speaking of Julius Caesar, he shall set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. He shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. And this was fulfilled undoubtedly with Cleopatra, whom Caesar, remember, married, but she was never for him. After this he shall turn his face to the isles and take away many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Strange language, isn't it? Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, to Rome, on the Tiber. But he shall stumble and fall and not be found. And remember, by his own very own friend, Brutus, Caesar was stabbed to death. He fell and was not found. Then shall stand up in his estate, or in his place, a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. And after after Julius Caesar came Augustus Caesar, remember, who made himself famous because he decreed that all the world should be taxed. The great taxer. And it was in the golden age of Rome that Augustus ruled. That's when Rome reached her height. And it says, within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Augustus Caesar, I think, was the only emperor that died in his bed in peace. Most of the others were assassinated. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, for he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And friends, the emperor that is spoken of by historians as vile was Tiberius Caesar. And notice what it says: with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, alluding to his military conquests, which were great, and shall be broken, yea, and here's a landmark, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Now here it indicates that under Tiberius, the prince of the covenant would be broken. In other words, the cross, Calvary. And brethren, in whose reign did Pontius Pilate order the crucifixion of Jesus Christ? It was Tiberius Caesar. So here's a landmark event, you see, that indicates to us we're on the right track. All right? So then right on down, we have a lot of other details here, and there's difference of opinion about these things. We cannot be dogmatic. But I believe there's room probably for reinterpretation of some of these things, because, you know, as we for years now, many have been studying this, and as we study, we increase in knowledge. And I believe now we come now to verse 30, and here we have a change. For it tells us here, for the ships of Chittim shall come against him, the king of the north, against Rome. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant, which is another term for the gospel. So shall he do, and even return and have intelligence with them, or unite with them, or what's the other translations say? They will work in harmony with them that forsake the holy covenant, that forsake the gospel. But what's this talking about? The ships of Chittim. What are the ships of Chittim? Well, friends, Adam Clark on this shows that the ships of Chittim represents the coastlands and islands of the Mediterranean. And every time it's mentioned, you'll find that definition perfectly fits. So here it indicates that from the coastlands of the Mediterranean would come ships against Rome. Did any naval power come against Rome from the Mediterranean? Yes, the one that stands out and fits the picture is that of the Vandals under Genseric the Great. A Christian was Genseric, and it seems he was divinely inspired. For when his navy would go out of the harbour, he would let the winds determine where they would go. And always their attacks were against Catholic Rome. For they were Arians. They were opposed to Catholicism. And friends, wherever they could, they destroyed the Catholic power, and finally sailed up the Tiber itself and sacked Rome and took from it much of its treasure, including, remember, the golden candlestick taken by Titus from Jerusalem and the table of showbread. And what happened to them? Well, on the way back, there was a great storm and one ship went down. What ship was it? The one with the candlestick and the showbread. It's interesting, isn't it? And those things from the Temple of Jerusalem are now down at the bottom of the Mediterranean. That's where they are. Well, I guess they are. So, there we have the Vandals brought to view. And the next part, it says, he shall be grieved and return and have indignation, or rather, therefore, shall he be grieved. And this brings us to the Emperor Justinian. And remember, Justinian became so grieved with the Vandals that he declared war against them, and he united with the papacy, with the Pope over in Rome, and began a holy war against the Arians and all those who were not in favor of Roman Catholicism. And says he would have intelligence with them that forsake the covenant. And he had intelligence with the papacy, with the Pope. Was the papacy guilty of forsaking the covenant? Certainly. They had gone into deep apostasy, that forsaken the gospel. And so here it says he has intelligence with them, or he shall give heed to those who forsake the covenant. The Amplified Version says he shall make common cause with those who abandon the holy covenant, which is exactly what Justinian did. And arms shall stand on his part, verse 31. Or better, arms or forces from him shall stand on his part, or shall appear. And what happened? Justinian put all the military power of pagan Rome behind the papacy and attacked the Vandals and the other Arian powers and destroyed them. And that paved the way for the political exaltation of the papacy. And now we come to three events that are landmark events.
and show us where we are and whether our interpretation is correct. Notice what they are. Arms shall stand on his part, verse 31, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, or daily, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. And this reminds us of Daniel chapter 8, where it describes the little horn, which was pagan and papal Rome. And what does it say about the little horn? The same three things the little horn would do. Daniel 8:12, it cast down the truth to the ground. That's the same as forsaking the holy covenant. Verses 11 and 13, the place of his sanctuary was cast down. The sanctuary was trodden underfoot, verse 13. Verse 11, by him, the little horn, the daily, was taken away. And chapter 8:13, the question is asked, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression or abomination of desolation? Well, the margin says of making desolate. Now see, friends, the same three things are brought to view in Daniel 8 that the papacy would do. And here they are repeated. The king of the north, you see, would do the same things, same three things. So here we have a landmark event that shows us we're on the right track. And we find that in 508 AD, those events took place when the daily was taken away. What was the daily? The daily represents the continual mediation of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. The place of his sanctuary was cast down. The knowledge of it was cast down. And they set up a false mediatorial system, a false sanctuary, a false priesthood, a false confessional, a false gospel, and the eyes of the world were turned away from the true to the false. The abomination of desolation. The term abomination nearly always applies to idolatry. And brethren, this false system of mediation is an idolatrous system of worship. For they worship, in particular, the central object of the worship is the host, the wafer, which they claim is turned from a biscuit to Christ. Yeah. And when they bow down to that biscuit in worship. And they still do, millions upon millions. It's idolatrous, it's abomination. And that was set up in 508 AD. This again, of course, is repeated in Daniel chapter 12, which speaks of the 1290 days and the 1335 days. You see, 508 is a very important date in connection with that. So this shows, you see, we're on the right track. All right, let's come on now. So the question is asked now, we have transferred from literal Rome to spiritual Rome. How can we logically do that? On what principle can we do that? It's argued that this starts off with as a literal prophecy, literal powers. It should end up that way. But today, in our interpretation, we don't. The original view was that the king of the north was the papacy, right down at the end here. Uriah Smith reverted back to the Protestant teaching on it, unfortunately. But what authority have we? Now, this seems to be inconsistent, starting off literal and ending up spiritual. What authority have we got? Brethren, here is the principle. The principle is the things pertaining to Israel before the cross or before Pentecost have a literal application. It's literal Israel. But after Pentecost, it is spiritual Israel. Who's spiritual Israel? That's right. The true people of God, the saints of God. If ye be Christ, then are you Abraham's seed. You see, there's the principle. Literal, spiritual. You see? Now, brethren, well, let's give an example of this. Verse 14, which we read before, notice it says, also the robbers of thy people, the breakers of thy people, the breakers of the Jews would exalt themselves. Who are they? The Jews, literal Israel. But when you come to chapter 12, verse 1, and remember there's no break in the prediction, it says, when Michael shall stand up, he shall deliver, at that time rather, thy people shall be delivered. Who are thy people? The Jews? No. It's spiritual Jews, spiritual Israel, the saints. But the soul, you see, we've transferred from literal to spiritual. Brethren, the dividing line is the cross or Pentecost. The Spirit of prophecy says, we are now in the dispensation of the Spirit. Things have a spiritual application in connection with Israel. Now then, if that is so with Israel, what about Israel's enemies and friends? What about the king of the north and the king of the south? Back here before the cross, before Pentecost, they're literal. It's a literal king of the north in literal territory. It's a literal king of the south, Egypt. But when we come over into the New Testament, into this era, to be consistent, we must spiritualize it. It's symbolic. It's the symbolic king of the north, the symbolic king of the south. And the geographical things have a symbolic, spiritual application, which we'll notice soon with you. So, let's notice now. Verses 32 to 35, we will not deal with that. That deals with the church in the wilderness, the time of tribulation that came upon God's people and how they would do exploits. That is a marvelous story in itself. How the remnants of God's people throughout Europe how they held to the faith, how they taught many, how they were burned, how they were destroyed, and for how long? It says until the time of the end. It would go on until 1798. For the time of the end, remember, is 1798. So, we won't go into detail or dwell on that. So now we come to verse 36. Verse 36, because we must get on. And it says, and the king shall do according to his will. And the king. And that's how it is in the original. The king. What king do you think that is? Well, it's either the king of the north or the king of the south. And if you go back to the last time the king's mentioned, it's the king that does away with the daily and sets up the abomination of desolation. The king. Now, Uriah Smith, in his attempt to bring in France, copying the Protestant expositors, changes it and says, a king. But it's contrary to the Hebrew. It's contrary to the Hebrew. All you got to do is look up the commentary on that and tell you. It's contrary. It's the king, not a king. He's translated a king to try and bring in another power. You see? And he makes this next section fit revolutionary France. Now, it's true, some sections do fit, but other sections do not. So it's the king. And, friends, to be logical, it's the king of the north. And here we have the time of papal supremacy. And he is ascribed 13 specifications concerning the king of the north. And every one fits to a T the papacy. Now, let's notice them. And you can get these, by the way, you can get these in my pamphlet. Now, some say, it is claimed that because God's people are pictured here as suffering tribulation till the time of the end, that when the next verse starts and deals with the king who rises up, that's after 1798. No, brethren, it isn't. It goes back to the rise of the papacy and deals with the supremacy of the king of the north. The Bible often does that. It goes down, you see, and often comes back and repeats certain areas and puts in more detail. And also there's something else I'd like you to notice too. Verse 40 refers to the time of the end when the king of the north will really begin to act. For notice what it says, at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, etc. That's 1798. This other section before that deals with this time of papal supremacy, and that is our official view. And by the way, what I'm telling you, friends, here is not my view, pardon me, It's not something I have worked out. This really, I suppose you could say, is our official view and has been for many years now, I guess 20 or 30 years. This has been the normal Seventh-day Adventist view in regard to the King of the North. We dismissed Turkey years ago. We're compelled to do it because history, it conflicted with the facts of history. And we must not make ourselves look ridiculous or ignorant in the eyes of those who are students. All right, so the next thing I want you to notice here is it's claimed that the spirit of prophecy upholds Uriah Smith's view regarding the King of the North here. Now, I want to show you that this is not correct. It is not correct. We need to be careful of statements like that. Now, I have in my hands the book, A Word to the Little Flock. You've all heard of that? One of the early publications put out by James and Ellen White. And here James White writes this. And remember, Ellen White was associated with him in the production of this pamphlet. And here on page 9, I want you to notice what James White says. Ellen White never took issue with James White over the identity of the King of the North. This is falsely stated by some. She took issue with her husband over the fact that when Uriah Smith got up at a great camp meeting and preached on Turkey, not Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, on the Eastern question, which was of great interest at that time, James White indignantly got up the next night and showed that he was clashing with the principles of interpretation of the book of Daniel, you see, which he was, of course. Ellen White took her husband aside and rebuked him. Why? For causing confusion. Causing confusion. There was a time and a place maybe for Uriah Smith to be answered, but not there. The same as if someone came here next week and began to talk on, to present that Turkey was the King of the North. That would be confusion. It shouldn't be done. We should allow a man to have his viewpoint and let it rest. Don't fight over it if it is not an essential. And this is not an essential. You see? To endeavor to become intolerant on these things, Ellen White says that is the spirit of Satan. So, brethren, on non-essentials, we should not be intolerant. If a man wants to differ from me on that, he's welcome to. And we should always be tolerant on those things, you see. And he should be tolerant of me, you see. All right. Now, notice what James White says. Michael is to stand up at the time that the last power in chapter 11 comes to his end and none to help him. This power is the last that treads down the true church of God. And as the true church is still trodden down and cast out by all Christendom, it follows that the last oppressive power has not come to his end, and Michael has not stood up. The last power that treads down the saints is brought to view in Revelation 13, 11 to 18. His number is 666. See that? So 66, the man with the number 66, brethren, 6 is the man, is the King of the North. Good know that. And Ellen White and James White together published that volume. So, brethren, whatever you do, don't misstate Ellen White on this question. In fact, I don't think that Ellen White, he received no vision on this question, and she doesn't speak specifically in regard to the identity of the King of the North. But you know, she did not oppose that, you see. All right, so let's continue on now. Verses 36 to 39. And here we have the 13 points identifying the papacy. And I want to go through these with you, just briefly. Verse 36, it says, he shall exalt himself and do according to his will, and shall magnify himself above every god. And who is this? let Scripture interpret Scripture. 2 Thessalonians 2:4, speaking of the man of sin, says he exalteth himself. Daniel 8:25, speaking of the little horn, the papacy says he shall magnify himself in his heart. Verse 11 says he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, that is to Christ. So there you have the scriptural interpretation of that verse in Daniel 11. Again, he shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. Fulfillment, well, here it is in Daniel 7:25. Speaking of the papacy, he shall speak great words against the Most High. Again, he shall prosper. Daniel 8:12, speaking of the little horn, it practiced and prospered. Verse 24, and shall prosper and practice. Again, Daniel 11, he shall prosper till the indignation shall be accomplished. Or, he shall prosper till the time of wrath is ended, the American translation of this. He shall prosper till the time of wrath is ended. What's the wrath of God? The 7 last plagues. He shall prosper till the end of the plagues. You see? And as we know, the third angel's message indicates that if any man worships the beast, etc., he shall receive the wrath of God, the 7 last plagues, showing that the king of the north, the papacy, you see, goes right down to the plagues. And Revelation 16:19 says, great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give to her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. That's under the 7th plague. So you see, the king of the north goes right down to the 7th plague, friends, to the second advent. Again, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, verse 37. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4 says, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God. Again, nor the desire of women, shall not regard the desire of women. What is the deepest desire of a woman? To marry and have children. What used to be. And who fulfilled that? 1 Timothy 4, 1-3, speaking of how there will be apostasy in the last days, it says, many shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, forbidding to marry. Who is it, friends, that's departed from the faith and forbids marriage? The papacy, the celibacy of priests and nuns, denying them the natural desire of women. There it is. Again, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. And 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4 says, who exalts himself above all that's called God or that is worshipped. And brethren, during this period of papal supremacy, do you know that there were numbers of popes who rejected God altogether? They were atheists. That's in history. And even in modern histories that have been produced concerning the popes, some of them were atheists. You see, fulfilling this. He shall magnify himself above all. Again, verse 38, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. The margin says Morsum, or God's protectors. What's this refer to? He shall honor God's protectors. Friends, we believe this refers to the invention of protectors to protect the people. And Matthew Henry, in commenting on this, says, our Lord God the Pope honors the God of forces, the God Morsum, or strongholds, saints and angels whom his followers take for their protectors. Is that right? Do they do that? Catholicism is riddled with that, my friends. Riddled with it. And one prayer to the Virgin Mary reads this way, thou Virgin Mother of God, thou impregnable wall, thou fortress of salvation. And here the prediction is that the King of the North, he would honor the God of forces, or God's protectors. And that's exactly what Catholicism has done. All right? And a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and precious things and things desired. margin. A God whom his fathers knew not. My friends, did the early Christians understand or look upon the Virgin Mary as one to worship and honor? No, they didn't. They didn't. Did they give honor or adoration to the saints, to relics? No, they did not. And when we read Revelation 17:4 describing the papacy, the woman, the harlot woman, it says here, by the way, in Daniel 11, that he shall honor them with gold and silver and precious things, or precious stones. And the Revelator says, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. And this is literally true. Still today, in Catholic countries, you see statues of the Virgin just loaded with jewelry. Must be worth millions. When you go to Jerusalem and see the legendary site of Calvary, there on the altar is a statue of the Virgin. You can hardly see her for the jewelry. You see the same thing down in Spain, you see? So there's the fulfillment of it. And then it says, thus shall he do within the most strongholds with a strange God whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And brethren, in regard to the Virgin Mary, it's interesting how she has increased the glory of the Virgin Mary. In the 1884 edition of Great Controversy, it lists out here, Vance Farrell has put here, the 48 steps down by the papacy. And amongst them he gives 4 steps in regard to the increase of glory of the Virgin Mary, at least 4 steps. 1593, the last part of Ave Maria has been prepared and is required of the faithful by Pope Sixtus V. 1854, what did I say? That's 1593 that was. No, pardon me, I'm mistaken here. 1508, the first part of Ave Maria saying is made official. 1508. 1593, the last part of Ave Maria has been prepared and is required of the faithful by Pope Sixtus V. 1854, the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary is proclaimed by Pope Pius IX. See the increasing glory to the Virgin. Then coming down to 1950, the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. I think that should be. Just a minute. No, that's it. 1950, the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, that means the bodily ascension into heaven, is proclaimed by Pope Pius XII. And in 1965, Mary is proclaimed to be the Mother of God by Pope Paul VI, the Mother of God. And then he says this, 2 additional doctrines are now being discussed and may soon be adopted. Mary as the mediatrix of mankind. This means that God and Christ can only be approached through her. The second is the dogma of Mary as the co-redemptrix of the world. The thought here is that the redemption of our race from start to finish is done through Mary, working together at each step with Christ. So the increasing glory to a God that their fathers knew not, fulfilled, my friends, to the very letter. And then it says, he shall cause them to rule over many. In Revelation 13, in speaking of the papacy, he says, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And then finally it says, and he shall divide the land for gain. Has the papacy divided the land for gain? My friends, the papacy alone claims the right to divide the world among the nations. And there are times when she has literally done this. In the reign of Henry II of England, Pope Adrian IV gave Henry authority to divide the land of Ireland. Later, the papacy divided the New World, the Western world, between Portugal and Spain. And as a result, it brought great wealth to the papacy. You know, when you go into Rome, into the great churches there, they'll often show you the gold of the ceilings. And there's one great church there, they'll show you the whole ceiling's a mass of gold. That was the first gold that Columbus brought back from the New World, indicating just how much she was associated with it. And she divided the world, the land, for gain. And she certainly did get great gain out of that. All right, So there are those points, 13 different points, and everyone puts the papacy in her supremacy. All right, now we come to the part that concerns our day. I was going to stop and have a break, but I think well, perhaps we'll have a break here, and we'll have a hymn. And then we'll have the last section, because this last section is the most important. Thank you, Brother Hill. We come now to the last section of Daniel 11, verse 40. And it brings us to the period, to the date 1798. Why? Because it speaks of the time of the end. And it's in this very chapter of Daniel 11 that the time of the end is designated as the time when papal supremacy or papal persecution ceased upon God's people. And so it says, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, push at the king of the north, push at the papacy. So this leads us now to identify the king of the south. And remember now, it is the spiritual king of the south. It is spiritual Egypt now. Just as the king of the north is spiritual Babylon, the papacy, so now we look at the spiritual king of the south. And who is the spiritual king of the south? Who is spiritual Egypt? Is Egypt, spiritual Egypt, spoken of anywhere in Scripture? Yes. Revelation 11. In Revelation 11, it tells us very plainly here, in alluding to the two witnesses which are attacked by the beast from the abyss, which is none other than revolutionary France. And here France comes into the picture. It says, alluding to France, it says that it describes her as the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. Spiritual Egypt. Now, brethren, this is very fitting, because Egypt was noted for her denial of the true God. And when revolutionary France, or when France revolted, remember the great revolution took place, the French Revolution, one of the outstanding marks of the revolution was their denial of the true God, right? Yes. And their opposition to Christianity, and in particular what they thought was Christianity. And what did they think was Christianity? That's right, the papacy. And brethren, it was an attack upon the papacy, and it culminated in the revolutionary government, the French Directory, sending Berthier with a French army to Italy to destroy the papacy, which he did, and fulfilled Revelation 13:3, where the beast received a deadly wound. So, brethren, the king of the south, the spiritual king of the south, did push at the king of the north. And as a result, well, we ought to put this down, France, the king of the south, is revolutionary France. Not France today, but revolutionary France. Because no longer does France like she was at the time of the French Revolution. Oh, no. So, atheistical France. And it's interesting to notice, my friends, that when the spirit of prophecy speaks about this power, revolutionary France, this is the statement. Great Controversy 269. This is atheism, referring to the policy and the spirit of the French Revolution. This is atheism. And the nation represented by Egypt would give voice to a similar denial of the claims of the living God, and would manifest a like spirit of unbelief and defiance. And here the spirit of prophecy labels revolutionary France as what? Represented by Egypt. Represented by Egypt. You see? So here we have France brought in, revolutionary France. and France pushed at the papacy and delivered to her the deadly wound. So let us put that down. 1798, the deadly wound. There we have the beginning of the last days. And now I want you to notice the next section here. France attacked the papacy and delivered the deadly wound. Now, where is spiritual Egypt today? Is the king of the south still in existence? Is atheism still in existence? And remember, it's organized. It must be organized atheism, because it's a king, and that represents a kingdom. Is there any kingdom, any nation, any political power organized atheism that's atheistic? Yes, communism, and particular communism in Russia, in Soviet Russia. And so I suggest that the king of the south still exists in communism, headed up by Russia. And here, brethren, I believe we have prophecy fulfilling before our eyes. For notice what it says next. And here we have the reaction of the king of the north to the pushing by communism. And brethren, has communism been pushing at the papacy? Very much so. The great power that the papacy has feared ever since its rise has been communism. And the reason is that both are seeking for the same goal. What's the goal? World dominion. Yeah. And we could go into detail of all the pushing done by communism. Tremendous pushing at the papacy. Poland, all of Eastern Europe, remember, was pro-communist, anti-Catholic. Spanish Civil War, that was communism versus the papacy. Italy, France, the communists were a great threat. In Africa, tremendous struggle between Catholicism and communism. Still going on. Vietnam. Why did America go into Vietnam?
Because of the papacy.
That's right. Because of the papacy. And who was behind the other side? Russia. Soviet Union. See? There we have it. King of the South pushing at the king of the North. We could go on and on. In South America, tremendous struggle between communism and Roman Catholicism. Chile is a prime example of the struggle between the two. Cuba, Timor, the Philippines, the labor unions. We see the contrast, the pushing between the king of the North and the king of the South. Tremendous tension, the labor unions, for the Catholics to get control or the communists to get control. And amongst the intellectuals of the world, of the Western world, you know, the universities of the world are riddled with professors who are communists or atheists. Atheism is rampant. And brethren, it's a form of pushing at the papacy, you see? Now, here again we have the reaction of the king of the North, of the papacy, to this. And this reaction has started. And notice what it says. Verse 40, and the king of the North shall come against him, the king of the South. He'll react. And it describes him like a whirlwind. The original means like a flood, like an overflowing river. With chariots, horsemen, many ships. Now, does all this now is in a symbolic sense. It denotes that the king of the North will attack. He will go on the attack, not in a military fashion as is pictured here. This is a military picture, but it represents the tremendous drive of the papacy to overcome the forces against her. And brethren, she's been planning this for decades, has Rome. Decades. If you read the book Facts of Faith, that gives you marvelous information of the planning that's been going on for years, for 100 years. Rome's been planning this. And now we're seeing it begin to be fulfilled. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. It's a picture, friends, of an invading, an overwhelming, victorious power. That's what it is. Now, Uriah Smith applied this to the Ottoman Empire, you see, and at that day it looked as if it could be true, but today, of course, the Ottoman Empire has gone. So it can no longer be applied to the Ottoman Empire. But you see, in their misunderstanding of this, they then applied it to Turkey. But brethren, it's never fitted Turkey, because Turkey is not a nation that has power to, you know, to rock the world, as it were. So to try and, you know, make amends, they'd also now apply it to Islam. And say, oh, it represents Islam, because all those countries over there in the East are Islamic, and there's a great revival of Islamism. But brethren, that's not the way to interpret prophecy. This does great damage. It makes us look a laughing stock. Let me ask you, where did Islam originate? To the north or to the south? It originated from the south. So it couldn't. If you're going to be literal, you can't say that it's the king of the north. See? And Islam is a religion. This is referring to political powers. You see, and the papacy is one of the great political powers of the world, even though it's cloaked in religion. So you see, it doesn't fit, brethren. We shouldn't try and fit things into prophecy. We must go to the Scripture and let Scripture interpret Scripture, you see. And it is, well, we'll come to this other point soon, where it mentions some other details. So here is what we might call the counter-attack of the papacy. He will come like a whirlwind, and friends, his power will increase and increase like a whirlwind, like a great flood. And notice what he does, verse 41. Now this is interesting. He shall enter also into the glorious land. The glorious land was Palestine. Palestine now has a spiritual application. Israel, or Palestine, was the land of Israel, the land of ancient Israel, the land of God's chosen people. Now it represents the realm of God's true Israel. It represents the realm of the church, the realm of the saints, not physical. And so here's a prediction that the papacy would enter into the glorious and into the realm of the church, of the true church. And we've seen this fulfilling. First of all, the papacy has entered into the realm of Protestantism, has it? Oh, tremendous. And notice what it says, and many countries shall be overthrown. Has Protestantism been overthrown, brethren? There's very little left of Protestantism, very little left. She has infiltrated it, and she's overthrown it, and there's no longer any protest, or very little. And brethren, not only that, she is now entering into the realm of the remnant church. She's entering into the realm of Seventh-day Adventism. I wish we had time to go into to prove to you how pro-Catholic many of our pastors are becoming. You all have heard about the class from Pacific Union College that were taken by their teacher to a mass, and they celebrated mass. They joined in the service, even passing around, I understand, the plates, etc. And they met afterwards, and they discussed the pros and cons of it, and they were agreed that they got much benefit from it. Brethren, that is partaking of an idolatrous service. So you see, the prophecy is true. He shall enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. Who are they? They no longer exist. The ancient prophets foretold that they would disappear, and they have. They're gone. That's one of the evidences of the inspiration of the Bible. Those powers have gone. They're no longer in existence. So now, this proves, you see, that this prophecy cannot be taken literally. There's no literal Edom, or Ammon, or Moab. So what do these powers represent? Let's have a look now. These were blood relatives of Israel, remember? The Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites. They were the prejudiced persecutors of God's ancient people. And we find that they are brought to view in the book of Numbers. And I want to show you here what they represent. Numbers 24, 17 to 18, here's a remarkable prophecy concerning these powers. And you notice what it says. There shall come a star out of Jacob. Who's that referring to? The Messiah. And shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy the children of Sheth, and Edom shall be for a possession for his enemies, and Israel shall do valiantly. Verses 17 to 18. Now there's a prophecy concerning Israel, and that they would smite the corners of Moab, Sheth, and Edom, etc. are mentioned there. Now whom do these represent? Notice, the spirit of prophecy, Patriarchs and Prophets 4:5:1 says, alluding to this, commenting on this, says, Moab and Edom represent the enemies of God. So here, in Daniel 11, it indicates that some peoples who are the enemies of God will escape from the papacy. Even these shall escape out of his hand. Now, how are they going to escape, and who are they? We have a very interesting prediction in Isaiah chapter 11 of these very same people. Isaiah 11. And here is a latter-day prediction of the Advent message. And this is how we have understood this through the years. And you notice what it says, verse 11 of Isaiah 11. Shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people. See that? And we've always applied this to the Advent message going to the world to bring out a remnant. And which shall be left from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, etc. Now all these have a spiritual connotation now, you see. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Now notice, they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines toward the west. This is referring to the proclaimers of the three angels' messages. They shall spoil them of the east together. They shall lay their hand upon Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. Now here's a prediction present of these very peoples who are classed as the enemies of God. When the Advent message comes to them, will obey. Will obey. Interesting? They will obey. And Prophets and Kings 3:75 to 6 applies this very passage, brethren, to the last days and to the Advent message. And here it tells us these peoples will be some of the enemies of God who will respond to the third angel's message. My brethren, will there be any who now are in opposition to us, who could be classed as our enemies? Will the day ever come when they will see the light and become members of the remnant church? We've always taught that that will be so. Some of our greatest opposers will accept the great message of God. And you know, many who are now prejudiced and opposed to the message of God, when the climax comes and papal worship is enforced, brethren, they will not accept papal worship. You know, there are many people out in the world who will never go along with Roman Catholicism, who will never accept it. And maybe they are the ones, brethren, who will respond to the Advent message when it goes forth with tremendous power. They'll respond to the message. And maybe this will include many of our loved ones. For you know, as I said before, Edom and Moab and Ammon, they were blood relatives of God's ancient people. Do you think the day might come when many of our blood relatives who have been brought up in this message, thousands of them, there must be millions of them out there, brethren, who were brought up as Adventists? Do you think the day might come when the tremendous events that their parents have spoken about, when they see them fulfilled, that they might rethink their position and come back I believe we may see millions of them come back to this message. And they'll escape. In doing that, they'll escape the papacy. They'll escape the attacks of the King of the North. They'll come out into the remnant and receive the protection of God. All right, next point here. Next point. And he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Egypt, who's Egypt now? The communist lands. The lands of communism. Soviet Russia. Soviet Russia. And the land of Egypt shall not escape. And maybe, brethren, we're seeing fulfillment, that fulfilled right now. For spiritual Egypt has now submitted to the papacy. Is that correct? She has. She's submitted to the papacy, no question. That's been made public. And, notice what else? He shall have, or rather, the land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Do you think it's possible the papacy might receive all the wealth and power that belongs to communism? You know, brethren, already in the Ukraine, the papacy has taken over many of the churches that belong to the Orthodox Church by force, with the connivance of the Soviet government. You know that? And maybe that's just a foretaste of what's coming. And it says, and the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Before we get on to that, let me notice with you a few points here concerning this, the treasures of Egypt, the communist lands. You know, Revelation 3 tells us that finally, how much of the world will wander after the beast? All the world. Does that include the communist lands? The communist powers? Undoubtedly. And notice what it says, Great Controversy 616, Romanism in the old world and apostate Protestantism in the new. Is Soviet Russia a part of the old world? It is. Eastern Europe is certainly a part of the old world. And brethren, it is going to follow Romanism. And volume 6, page 18, every country on the globe will be led to follow her, America's example. And what will America do? Enforce the mark of the beast, Roman worship, in every country on the globe. So that means all the countries of the world, friends, are finally going to receive or accept papal policy, papal worship, every country on the globe. And isn't what this indicates? He shall have power over the nations, over all the precious things of Egypt. What about China? Do you think China will remain communistic? I'd say not. Say not. One day China is going to give in. Communism will be overthrown. The same as in other countries where communism is still established. It'll be overthrown. It's only a matter of time. And the way will be paved for the papacy and papal policy in some form or other to be accepted. And the final form will be the mark of the beast. And then notice it says, the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps, or be in his train. The Libyans and Ethiopians. Now this, yeah, be in his train, shall follow. Now the Libyans and Ethiopians, we know who they are literally. They were never a part of the Ottoman Empire. Never. So what's this mean? Who are the Libyans and Ethiopians? Jamieson, Fawcett and Brown, they say the Libyans and Ethiopians were the traditional allies of Egypt. The traditional allies of Egypt. Who's Egypt? Soviet Russia. And maybe it represents those who are traditional allies of Russia, communist supporters throughout the world. They will come, submit to Rome and give communism away. In many parts of the world, communism, you know, still has power and influence, doesn't it? But brethren, the day is going to come when that will disappear. You take the labor unions. Are many of them communist? Do they lean toward communism? Yeah, they do. Let me ask you, what does the spirit of prophecy declare concerning the labour unions in the future? Who are they going to support? They're going to support the religious powers, brethren, in the enforcement of the mark of the beast. You see that? So maybe this refers to the working man. You know, the Libyans and Ethiopians, some look upon them as the servant peoples of the world. And they were servants at times to Egypt, but and it may represent the servant peoples, the working peoples, the labour unions, who finally will give their allegiance to the papacy, to the King of the North. Now, verse 44, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him, shall trouble the King of the North. And as a result of this, it says, therefore, he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. Now, Dr. Newton claims that the Hebrew means that this is a religious enactment, a universal religious boycott is the significance of the Hebrew, and there are others who back him on that. So here it indicates that as a result of tidings from the east and the north, the papacy will become infuriated and will enact religious laws. Now, what are the tidings out of the east and out of the north that would trouble the papacy? Do you know of anything that comes from the east, that Scripture talks about as coming from the east, that's going to stir up the papacy? Revelation 7 tells us something comes from the east. An angel comes from the east. What does an angel represent? A message. A message comes from the east. And what is the message? The message concerns the seal of God. What's the seal of God? At least the great Sabbath truth. And in the loud cry, the Sabbath truth is going to be proclaimed to the world as never before, right? Yep. The third angel's message. And will that stir up the papacy, brethren? In the loud cry? Now it says not only tidings out of the east, but tidings out of the north. And then in Scripture, in the Old Testament, the north represents the place from which the judgments of God come. Now, brethren, will tidings concerning the judgments of God upon the papacy be sounded in the future? In Revelation 18, in the loud cry, my friends, there is the message concerning the judgments of God that are going to come upon the papacy, upon Babylon. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. And as a result of the plagues come upon her. That'll be a part of the message, brethren, of the loud cry. And what will the result be? The result will be fury on the part of the papacy. Fury. For listen to what it says, to early writings, 279. The last great warning had been sounded everywhere, and it had stirred up and enraged the inhabitants of the earth who would not receive the message. And who will lead them? The papacy. The papacy. It'll be, her reaction will be that of fury against those who proclaim the message of God that comes from the east and is pictured as coming from the north, you see. And so there, I believe, we have, perhaps that is the fulfillment of that. And the next thing I'd like you to notice here, when I find my right page, is verse 45. And this crowns, for it says here, he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Now, brethren, he plants the tabernacles of his palace. What does this mean? Now, Uriah Smith wrote that this represented the fact that the King of the North set up in Jerusalem Al-Aqsa and the Mosque of Omar. Did the King of the North set them up? Did Turkey set them up? Did the Ottoman Empire set them up? No. Who set them up? They were set up by the third successor of Muhammad. And I'll give you the date that they were set up. They were set up in 691 AD. 691 AD, way back in the early part of the Christian era. But this prediction, brethren, is at the time of the end, after 1798, right at the end. He's to plant the tabernacles of his palace, you see. And they were set up by the successor of Muhammad, And he came from the south. He came from Arabia. He came from Mecca, from the south. But here it's the king of the north. What does this represent? This represents, my friends, an attack upon Jerusalem. Literal Jerusalem or spiritual Jerusalem? Spiritual Jerusalem, the church. It represents an attack upon the church. And we find this, brethren, once before the king of the north attacked the church during papal supremacy. And when the Revelator refers to this in Revelation 11, he uses this language. Notice what he says. It's almost identical language. In chapter 11, he says this. It says, leave out the temple, leave out the court rather, measure it not, for it's given to the Gentiles, and the holy city, what's that? Jerusalem. And here it represents the Christian church. Shall they tread underfoot 40 and 2 months? Now here it says that the holy city during the 42 months or 1260 years is trod underfoot by the Gentiles, the papal Gentiles. It trod underfoot for 1260 years. Now, brethren, when the papacy rises again to world power, she will make her final attempt to tread down the city of God. Rather, the church of God, spiritual Jerusalem. She will invade the church of God. She will invade the church. So let me put this down. Here we have, after 1798 and the deadly wound, Rome resurges. The healing of the deadly wound. And at the same time, being pushed at by communism, which we've discussed. Then, finally, it's going to come where tidings out of the east and out of the north will trouble him, representing, we suggest, the loud cry. And as a result of the loud cry, there'll be religious enactments, universal boycott, which will culminate in Sunday laws. And they will culminate in the death decree. And in the death decree, friends, I believe here is represented the papacy attacking spiritual Jerusalem, endeavoring to plant the tabernacles of Apollos right in that city and taking it over and destroying the inhabitants. That's the picture here. In Daniel 11, he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace. And the fact that this is Jerusalem, if you read Daniel 9, the same language almost is used of Old Jerusalem. But now, you see, it has its spiritual application to the church. And what church in particular? What section of the church? The remnant. The remnant. That's the section of the church. And the final attack is here brought to view. An endeavor to invade the church and trample it down and possess it. And when she does that, notice what happens. When she does that, he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace, or when she endeavors to do this, between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Back in Daniel 8, and referring to this, it says, he shall be broken without hand, meaning divine intervention. In Daniel 2, it mentions the stone coming down and smiting the image, divine intervention. And here we have the same thing. He's broken, he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Divine intervention. How will the king of the north come to his end? And here some have misrepresented our position here, so I want to make it clear. And there's no break between Daniel 11 and 12. And here it is. At that time, and that word time means in that period, that short period at the end, at that time shall Michael stand up. What stand up means? Reign. He takes to him his kingdom, seventh trumpet, and his power and his authority. He stands up on behalf of his people. And notice what it says, the great prince which stands for the children of thy people. In the original it means it stands over his people. He rises, he takes the reins of power and he stands over them in protection. Beautiful, isn't it? So when the king of the north, when the papacy has gained universal power, and this small remnant, this Mordecai and the gate stand in the way, these dissenters, and he has the backing of the population of the world to get rid of them, and it seems utterly hopeless, Michael stands up. Probation closes. He stands over his people. And notice, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. So, brethren, here we have the close of probation. And what have we got here? And deliverance. The plagues. And the king of the north goes right through the plagues, because the plagues, remember, are sent upon Babylon. The plagues come upon the king of the north. Right up till the 7th plague, it says, and great Babylon, the king of the north, came in remembrance before God to give to her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Babylon's punishment goes right down to the end, brethren, and culminates in the second advent. The king of the north goes down to the second advent, when he's destroyed by the brightness of his coming, or the remnants of Babylon are destroyed by the brightness of his coming. So there it is, thy people shall be delivered. Delivered from whom? Delivered from what? Delivered from the papacy. Delivered from the king of the north. Delivered from the king of the north. Because by that time he's gained world power and all support him. You see? And so there you have the answer to Daniel 8:13. How long will it be? How long will the host be trodden underfoot? How long? Until Michael stands up. There's the answer. Until Michael stands up. That's when it will be. So, brethren, the question is, who are God's people? Who are those that are to be delivered? It says those whose names are in the book. What book? The book of life. And the question is my name in that book? And how do I get my name in that book? By accepting Christ, by being born again. How do I keep it there? By overcoming. By being an overcomer. And if by the grace of God I succeed in Christian living and develop by his grace the character that will fit me for translation, my name will be retained in the book and Christ will deliver me. Brethren, what a wonderful future we have. Deliverance, brethren, is ahead. In the coming conflict, we have nothing to fear. For Michael is with us and he'll stand up, he'll deliver us. May God keep us true till that day. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this great prophecy. Thank you that you've helped us to gain some insights into it and to what it means, and how it concerns the great controversy between Christ and Satan, and not mundane things. Lord, we pray very sincerely that thou wilt help us, each one, to be true to Jesus Christ and to follow him with all our hearts and to allow him to reign within and to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So now as we go our way, be with us and help us to be true members of the remnant, we ask in our Saviour's precious name. Amen.